One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be...
Contrary to what you said, I don't think it's possible to separate criticism of Muslims from criticism of Islam, because Muslims only exist because they believe in Islam, and Islam only exists because it has people to believe in it. These are inherently married things. However, calling someone a camel fucker isn't a criticism, that's an insult. And even if I don't endorse such insults, I'm not going to call them out because I don't give internet insults any weight, and if a Muslim does, that's their problem. I don't exactly know what kind of information you expect would be shared in such an exchange, but if you can find a moderate Muslim who's willing to have such a discussion, do let me know. On a tangential note, as a feminist, why are you more concerned about how anti-SJWs treat Muslims and not how Muslims treat women?
You denied that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general. If so, what? Okay, just step over, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
Correct. I don't think racism against blacks is a systemic issue, and if you disagree with me on that, please indicate the law that legalizes discrimination. I find it both incredibly dishonest and egotistical to imply that smart people can't possibly disagree with you.
If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
Oh, is that the problem? Had I workshopped solutions to racial issues with Black Lives Matters, that would have stopped them from rioting and burning down cities? Sorry, Charlotte, I guess that riot was our fault.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black-on-black crime, when are you going to do a video about white-on-white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
I'll do that as soon as white-on-white crime becomes as proportionally large of a problem as black-on-black crime. Now, given that black-on-black crime is proportionally the greater problem, why don't you like drawing attention to it?
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, "No! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!"
That's not Milo's definition of racism, as if Milo came up with it. That's a definition of racism that is becoming worryingly mainstream.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
I don't think that racism is a self-applied identity. However, I think the people you identify as racist are not necessarily so, because your definition of racism, pointed out in the last question, is bullshit.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
Well documented, various studies. Point to me where legal discrimination against blacks exists, and I will seek to address it. I don't find it racist to discuss racial issues, I just don't think discrimination is as large of a problem as you are making it out to be. In fact, I would say the biggest problems facing the black community are caused by other black people.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Do you understand basic English syntax? Because the phrase all lives matter encompasses the sentiment Black Lives Matter. The reverse is not true. And given that the reverse isn't true, saying all lives matters is ridiculous is fucking absurd.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women, and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts? If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
In your previous question, you brought up how you didn't like it when people attributed the actions of other feminists to you, so you shouldn't be comfortable with feminism as a whole. Also, feminism doesn't have a monopoly, or even a handle, on endorsing equality between men and women. As for male feminists doing it for the pussy, not all of them do it, but not none of them do it either.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Well, I don't consider myself a part of any community, so I will be doing nothing about it. But even if I did, I still wouldn't be word policing people around me because that would make me a cunt. Also, even though those words are primarily directed at men, they are not man-hating words. They don't hate men for the fact that they're men, they hate men who engage in certain behaviors. Besides, it wasn't too long ago that someone else in this video described faggot as not having the power it once had, and is now just a catch-all insult. Why is it that you are now trying to imbue the word with power that it no longer has?
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument? Deepak Chopra, for example, a man who trots out an endless stream of pseudoscientific quantum woo bollocks, has nearly 3 million followers. So what? Those people follow him because he tells them what they want to hear. Why even mention the number of followers you have? What difference does it?
Subscriber numbers and view count have nothing to do with how right you are, seeing as I am more right than all of you and I have less than 10 subs and less than 100 views. View and sub counts aren't irrelevant, though, because if you're a social movement, you do need popularity behind you in order to get things done. That the anti-social justice side is more popular doesn't make them right, it's just an added bonus.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms, and whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say?
Divulging your identity comes with very few upsides, but opens you up to quite a lot of risk when it comes to online discourse. It's simply not pragmatic to do what you're asking. Maybe you should bring up your problem with pseudonyms and avatars to the two people in this video who are using pseudonyms and avatars. And as for my criticism of safe spaces, I have nothing against them as a concept. If you want to be safe in your house, be my guest. My problem is when they encroach on public or publicly accessible areas that we need to share, like Twitter.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people. And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, and I guess that's just what you're into, just makes you a dick.
Well, at this point, I don't really have any fans, so this isn't really a criticism leveled at me. But I myself am a fan of some of the people you level this criticism at, so let me respond from that perspective. Any negativity or bullying behavior that originates from me is my responsibility, and no one else's, and do not attribute my behavior to anyone but me. Stop giving Bearing and Undoomed credit for my cyber violence. As to why they wouldn't carry out an anti-bullying campaign, I'd expect that that's because that doesn't fall under their interests, and they're here primarily to entertain.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
I don't find that hard to believe. I just think that the bar that you've set for harassment is significantly lower than what I've set it at. Even so, I'm sure that feminists do get lots of legitimate harassment. But that's not exclusive to feminism, and I don't consider that a feminist issue. So, in essence, it's not that I don't believe, it's that I don't care.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That's simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem.
Again with this nonsense about not being well informed enough to criticize your position. Did you think it necessary to read Mein Kampf before you realized Nazism wasn't an avenue worth pursuing? Or did you instead just observe the behavior of Nazis? And if you don't think people who identify as feminists are adequately representing feminism, why are you addressing me and not them?
Do you realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique? It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
So mine is a social justice that is less preoccupied with people's feelings and is less authoritarian. Good.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
I care for no one's definition of egalitarianism but my own, and if you think I mean something other than what I intend when I call myself an egalitarian, you don't understand how language works.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
I am not against academic freedom, and I do not oppose your right to teach whatever wacky bullshit you want to teach. However, I do advocate against making that wacky bullshit mandatory for majors other than social justice. An electrical engineer should not be required to take a course on feminism's influence on fine art.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
Because I think she's a fraud, and I disagree with many of her fundamental positions. Now, why are you obsessed with my opinion of someone else?
Do you really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... fuck.
That question made a lot more sense when it was directed at people who were attempting to impose their sensibilities on others. Wow, what an awful experience this has been for probably everybody involved. I'm gonna go back to oppressing black people on Twitter. If you'd like to help me enforce the white cis-het male patriarchy, then please do so. That's it for now, but join me next time when I respond to other stupid shit.